All right, welcome back. This is your Gaza War sit rep day 133. No end in sight. We have rested. We were people in the comments on our last sit rep 2 days ago. They told us we need to rest, and I suggested we were going to take yesterday off, and they said yes, please take tomorrow off. So we did. We took the day off. We're back today. Um, and today was a day I actually like this. We instead of breaking down military events, we actually had words. The greatest weapon wielded today was words. And there were three different speeches. I mean, a spokesperson for Ansarallah, Baiti, who actually was interviewed by Max Blumenthal maybe a month ago. I would highly recommend that interview to people. But he was interviewed by Al Mayadeen, I think today. And then we have Abu Obaida, the spokesperson for Qassam Brigades, the Hamas's armed wing. He gave a speech today. And we had, of course, Syed Hassan Nasrallah, the general secretary of Hezbollah from Lebanon, gave a speech today. So we're going to break down the speeches. Because these speeches are important, and there's a lot to learn from these speeches. Bukhaiti was interesting, John, because I know you didn't catch that. Bukhaiti was interesting because he had a lot. It's a unique perspective that he has. So he was everybody today had criticisms. I don't know if Abu Abi did it, but certainly Nasrallah had criticisms of the Arab leaders of the non-resistance countries, let's say, right? He had lots to say about Egypt. And Bukhaiti was saying, why can't the Islamic scholar community issue a fatwa saying, we should fight against Israel? Like, why can't they take a stronger so he was saying the Islamic religious leadership needs to take a stronger stand, and he was saying if they did, that would make it easier on people like Hezbollah in Lebanon, easier on Syria and Iraq. And he was saying, like, why can't they take a stand and make it like religiously more acceptable to unite on this basis? And he had this interesting thing where he was like, even if we're even short of achieving Muslim unity or Arab unity, the possibility that this event could unify the Arab community or the Muslim community would be enough to get the Americans to call the aggression off. And it was a very interesting analysis that he had, and he was kind of noticing, and he was saying, if Hezbollah didn't have to worry about disunity on the Lebanese political front, they would be able to manage they would have more escalation options available to them. And likewise, Syria, Iraq, etc. So it was interesting to see that. It was an interesting analysis, especially because, the past few days, I've been wondering if there's been a lull in operations, or if it's just like felt that way subjectively, or if the Iraqi resistance has slowed a little bit, their tempo. I don't know. I don't know if it has. Abu Obaida, actually, we can transition to Abu Obaida, but Abu Obaida actually made a point of saying we don't necessarily talk about all of our operations, and we won't until later because of operational security and not wanting to give away information.
Yeah.
What did you pull out of Abu Ubaida's speech?
Well, there hasn't been a Qassam field report for 3 full days. So I think that it was interesting that he said that. It's interesting that their communication was an Abu Ubaida message. We haven't heard from him since he spoke on day 100. So we haven't heard from him for more than a month. And yeah, he made the point.
And it's an audio, it's not a video.
It's an audio, but he did say the day. He said the day number. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be any difference in the conditions, like what he said about the battlefield conditions, that, we don't report all of our operations, that sometimes we pick and choose based on the conditions on the ground. That's true, but it's something that's been true for the whole war. So I think it is noticeable that there is a pretty significant downtick in operations. I think partly, at least partly,
They don't
consistent
have
with the
access to
Israelis.
the Israel. Yeah, they don't have
Yeah, the
access
Israelis
to
have
the Israelis.
withdrawn.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've withdrawn their troops from the urban environment, and but even still, like, they still are in the buffer zone, so it's not totally clear what's going on. But even the Israelis' field reports are all uh, like summaries of the last couple of weeks, which does indicate the winding down of their operation in Khan Yunis. I mean, they're going in and destroying the last hospital um, in Khan Yunis, Nasser Hospital. I don't know
What
how.
there's been of operation reports has been in Khan Yunis. Yassine, we've hit a Merkava tank in Khan Yunis. We've hit uh,
Yeah, so they pulled out of the
issues.
Israelis pulled out of the north. They reinvaded the north, and then they have pulled out in the last few days from Gaza City, pulled out and left a bunch of horrors to be found. And it appears that they're doing that in Khan Yunis too. So there's lots of battlefield conditions that would explain
Mhm.
the resistance tempo dropping. There's this sort of strange interim period where it seemed like we were headed towards some sort of a ceasefire that now
Mhm.
seems like a little bit further off than it did. So it's
Yeah,
possible that the resistance is just, this is a
repositioning
regrouping, yeah, ready for the final battle that Israel says is coming
through Rafah.
in Rafah. But there's nothing if there was something that the Israelis did to the resistance to break this communication, the Israelis don't know that they did it. So it doesn't appear to be based on anything that the Israelis have done, because their field reports are very similarly
Mhm.
very down tempo, very summary of operations from the last few weeks. Like today, they wrote a whole piece on killing one fighter,
Mhm.
um, which is this again. These are the kind of their field reports don't match, which is something Abu Ubaidah said as well. That their the IDF field reports don't in any way amount to the numbers that they've claimed, which is something
Well,
Abu Ubaidah said was
he
true.
talked about the systemic nature of Israeli lying and Israeli allies lying and Israeli supporters lying here in Canada and the US, etc. He didn't say that, but I have to add that. Um, he said a bunch of great things. He said, I'm not going to spend time in detail refuting all of their lies about their fake achievements. Um, Not even their best friends believe them. Not even their people believe them. But I will say that all of the stuff they're saying is lies, basically.
Yeah, well,
Just
I mean, even like the Israeli and American intelligence reports don't match on their
yeah.
casualties. The American, but they don't have any idea. So to pretend like they have some kind of accounting on this, um, I mean, I think we're into counting statistics. I think that's just one of the ways of tracking the war is through the counting statistics. But yeah, Um, they're just not serious. I mean, I think we've talked about it a number of times. The casualty figures, were they to be true, um, would 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 be well into teenagers being counted, including every single man killed of any age, all the way from the most elderly to like literally the middle teens. They would have to count every single one of those people to be
Mm-hmm.
talking about their numbers. So um, yeah, and like the IDF military intelligence reported to the Netanyahu government yesterday that there was no total defeat of Qassam, of Hamas. Uh, there was no total defeat, no total victory for the Israelis, which is Netanyahu's language. He's been saying that if they don't invade Rafah, if we don't carry out this operation, then we've lost the war, which matches with all of their sort of extreme statements about saying, like, if they lose this war, they can't live in the Middle East.
Yeah.
If they don't invade Rafah with 650,000 children. Um,
Netanyahu just lies continuously. It's just a stream of lies. But um, the kind of emotional notes that are kind of touched by Abu Obaida. There's a lot of, the resistance suffers the same as the people. Um, you know, the
you can't defeat a people whose children teach the adults lessons in strength. And if there's just the most Palestinian truth, right? Like the ferocity of the kids, um, and that's why I say there's 600,000 plus in Rafah children uh, watching this like being deeply participating in this brutality with every minute of their lives, and in some, like, Israel's killing kids that were born since the war
during the
started.
operation. Yeah. Yeah.
And just like the sacking of Nasser Hospital, and then Israel today putting out that they
Well,
found in
actually,
a
there's
pharmacy that there
yeah.
was a couple of prescriptions written for someone that has the same name as, like, just absurd horrors justified by these pathetic lies. And not to jump ahead to Nasrallah's speech, but Nasrallah did a pretty serious archiving of the lies since October 7th, which was
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. That was really, really cool.
Because in
That was really good.
contrast to Abu Ubaidah, whose speeches are about 10 minutes long,
Yeah. Nasrallah
Abu
takes his
Hadi
time.
today had to
He,
apologize for taking
yeah, it
people's
was funny.
time.
He said, thanks for putting up with me. It's like everybody in the region is like sitting there waiting for everything he says,
Yeah,
and he's
they
like,
closed their stores.
thanks for putting up with me. But yeah, okay, let's get to Nasrallah. Yeah, that was one thing that okay, maybe we should kind of go in order. He talked about because it seemed to me the main point of the speech was that Israel had done a couple of really high profile massacres of Lebanese civilians in Nabatea, women and children. And he was saying, these are going to be answered with attacks on settlements, not attacks on soldiers, not on attacks on technical equipment, because he made a real differentiation where he said, our soldiers die on the front. We're not playing tennis. Or, I don't know. I don't remember what he said. Like he said something like, what are we playing tennis on the front? We're not playing tennis on the front. Like people die. Their soldiers die. Our soldiers die. That's normal. But they seem to have forgotten that there's a red line about civilians, and they're going to learn, they're going to pay a price in blood for what they've done here. And he said, there was this kind of, it wasn't just revenge, because he said that, right? He's like, we're not trying to keep up with their atrocities. We're not trying to kill one of theirs for one of ours or anything. But he said, what are they trying to achieve? They're trying to achieve by attacking our civilians. They're trying to get us to stop to close this front, and we are not going to close this front, and we are going to escalate this front, and we are not going to, and there's going to be an answer. That was, I guess that's the first part of what he said, and in some sense, like, most of his speech was about that. Do you want to add to that part?
No, just that was Israel changing the rules of engagement by massacring civilians,
Mm-hmm.
and that this is just like a micro version of the Dahia doctrine, or that
Mm-hmm.
Israel has always carried out, which is that they respond to military failures by massacring civilians. And Hezbollah has been able to institute a deterrence on the Lebanon front that's not allowed anymore. That's a change, which he noted is part of the success of resistance.
Yeah.
Is that they've changed the dynamic from being a vassal state to being a sovereign, dignified nation, and that's the product of resistance. And it's, I mean, it's something that we've said on the show all the time. The idea that the Israelis can kill their way out of the resistance is ridiculous. Every single example in history shows that the resistance just deepens with these kind of attacks on civilians, right? Like, including the birth of Hezbollah itself in 1982, which Nasrallah said if it weren't for Hezbollah not surrendering in 1982, that there
Yeah.
would have been, that Israel would exist all the way up to
Yeah,
Beirut,
yeah.
that
So let's get
greater
into
Israel.
let's get into that, because he's addressing, this is like, that's kind of like the next point, right? Because he addresses like the cost of resistance. So, and is a little bit bitter towards Arab fellow Arabs. So he says, people are always reminding us of the cost of resistance, the cost of the resistance, how many people die because of resistance. And he's like, the options that we have are resistance and surrender. Those are the two options that we have. So what is the price of resistance? This is what the price of resistance is. Now let's look at the price of surrender. And then he says, if we had surrendered in 1982, there would be Israeli settlements here. The Israeli ambassador would determine our foreign policy. We would have no control over our resources. What else?
Thousands of prisoners
The
tortured.
prisoners, the prisoners. I know that this is a story that you always like to tell about how the Hezbollah liberated thousands of
Yeah, like
prisoners.
with the torture regime that the South Lebanon army ran with the Israelis during the occupation was brutal, and the torture prisons were like the worst in the world. And Hezbollah literally, the villagers literally, when the Israelis left, like we told the stories of the Israelis running away. But the next part of the story is that the villagers ran when they saw that the Israelis had run away. Within like minutes, they had run up to the prison and were in Hiam torture prison and were like taking rocks and smashing the locks off of the, like telling the people inside, like, you're free. Then they're like, get me out of here. And they're in these tiny boxes. I visited Hiam, and it's crazy. They just, it's like a laboratory for torture. They had these tiny little metal boxes that they put people in that you would have to, like, well, they had different sizes of them, but like that you would squat in for days and days just in this metal box, and they would bang on the box, and they would, it was hot in the summer and freezing in the winter, like real burned into the consciousness of the people of what um what that surrender meant
Yeah.
in human costs, or what would have meant, what the resistance meant,
He he he
freeing that.
he talks about Algeria. He says the cost of resistance in Algeria was one, maybe 2 million people were killed by the French. But if it wasn't for that resistance in Algeria, Algeria would still be a colony today. It would still be a colony of France today.
Yeah, and thousands of
So,
people were killed during that, right? It's not like you
yeah,
surrender and then you get to live. Yeah, you
yeah.
surrender and you die.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then this is where he gets his own hits against the Arab regimes, because he says, you want to know what else is the price of surrender? The fact that there are 2 billion Muslims in the world and they can't even bring humanitarian aid. They can't even bring tents and water and medicine to Gaza, and that's because they've surrendered. Buchaiti said that too. He said that to Max Blumenthal, and he said that today to Al Mayadeen. He said, he said to Max something. I get really emotional when I talk about this, but he said, like, people feel bad for us because we're getting bombed, but we feel bad for the other Arabs who can't do anything, who are, because we can do things and they can't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the Yemenis, for the Yemenis, for people of a blockade, like that the last half generation of their life was defined by a blockade,
Yeah.
to be carrying out this action. And it's Friday, so it was the day of the Yemeni protests, and it's just unbelievable the numbers of people that they get out for these Friday demos
It's a
in Yemen.
million every it's a million every week. Yeah.
And so, and then you look in all these other Arab countries, and you're just not seeing that. And yeah, I mean, to verbalize that, it's just so visibly obvious in these Friday demos. The fact
Okay.
that they
Yeah.
can't run the blockade is going to be a shame that hangs over.
It's incredible. It's incredible. It's what an exposure of the invincibility of the American Navy.
Well, they're
Um,
reporting on flour. The Americans demanded a month ago some shipment of flour, and Netanyahu agreed to some shipment of flour into Gaza. It still hasn't gotten in. The aid into Gaza over the last week is lower than at any point that it's
oh,
been.
I
So
thought, yeah, okay. Now I misunderstood you. I thought you were saying that the Americans couldn't run the Red Sea blockade, and you're saying the fact that the Arab regimes can't run the Israeli blockade on humanitarian aid.
yeah, yeah. Well,
There are
how come
two
they can't just
blockades.
sail a ship in
Why
like
can't the Turks do it? Why can't the,
in a in
I
a
mean,
in a
yeah,
convoy?
yeah,
What's an armada? What's the
an
what's
armada.
the
Yeah, it's an
naval?
armada. It's this
An
the Spanish
armada
armada.
of white flagged
Yeah.
in like
Okay, and then we get to well, the probably the quotable quote. The quotable quote was towards the Israeli defense minister, right? He
oh yeah,
said
that he's three
he's
quarters
three
insane.
fourths insane, and then he said he should know that we have precision missiles that can go from Kiryat Shimona to Eilat.
Which was a reference to Gallant, the defense minister, the other day, saying that if there was a war, the war would with the North, that it would basically it would that Haifa would be involved. He was talking about how dangerous it is that Haifa
Mm.
would be involved. And Nasrallah today was like,
The
buddy, it's
Haifas
a lot more than
we
Haifa
can reach.
involved.
Yeah. So maybe I should show a map. That's probably worth showing a map just because where what to make it clear exactly what he's saying because of where Eilat is, right? Um,
Yeah, I mean, he was just basically saying that they can reach anywhere in
it's the
Israel with
southern,
precision guided missiles that
yeah.
have never been a
So
factor before.
Haifa, so Beirut, Lebanon is here. Haifa's pretty close to Lebanon, and there was the defense minister was saying, "Oh my God, they might reach Haifa." Haifa's a big city; it's a port; it's an
Yeah.
important city. And what Nasrallah is saying is, we can reach all the way down here, uh,
Yeah.
to this port down here.
Every airfield, every infrastructure node, uh, it's just a completely different war. You're talking about like the Israelis themselves um, are preparing for 4,000 missiles a day. We have no idea, obviously, but they're talking about
Yeah, and I
that,
mean
which is
that there was
more
a
than the whole
yeah.
2006 war,
And there
the
was a
whole
test
war.
run. There was a test run immediately after the attack on Nabatea, where they fired. Nasrallah referred to that. They fired a bunch of Katyushas, which is like the cheapest and first type of rocket that they developed there. And it's a Soviet. I guess it's like I think it's a World War II gun, right?
Yeah,
It's a
it's
World War II. I think it was little Katya. I think Katyusha means little Katya. I think it's like a woman's name.
I'm not
And
sure actually about that, but yeah, it's the most rudimentary form of rocket compared to the capacity that Hezbollah has. And he was talking about the phallic.
yeah,
Um,
it's a Soviet weapon from World War II, and they affectionately called it that because that's a girl's name basically. Katya. Katyusha is a song about a girl longing for her absent beloved who's gone away on military service. So they're firing a bunch of these World War II era rockets to activate the missile defense, the Iron Dome, and then they have the Falak missile, which is a bigger missile, and those were the ones that hit um, their targets.
And that's the hint, right? Like the hint is that they can fire, that they have the
Yeah,
ability to defeat these systems that
yeah,
Israel has for the last half generation, sort of based its security on this missile defense that is just it's what we presume it to be obsolete once this actually happens because you just flood the zone.
yeah.
And yeah, so it's a 50 kilo warhead versus a um, I'm not sure what the Katyushas actually are.
The Katyushas,
They're
I don't
like
even know that
5.
they have warheads. Yeah, maybe they do. I'll take a look. But yeah, I mean, that's still, they have even bigger missiles than that.
Yeah, no, and so this is all just a hint of what could come, and the fact that the Israelis are just play, I don't know. I mean, militarily, they have been playing the rules of engagement fairly tight, which indicates that they don't
Well,
actually want a war.
well, even when they assassinated Saleh Aruri, they immediately followed that up by saying we don't have a quarrel with, this was an attack on a Palestinian, not a Hezbollah. And
Yeah.
and there was all these contortions to say that it wasn't, even if it was us, which I'm not saying it was, but all of that
Yeah, I
nonsense.
mean that was the basic point was Nasrallah said like we're here as long as you want this war to go on. The war
Yeah,
is not going to end um,
yeah. It
because of
was a
some sort
very
of
hang
verbal
in there.
agreement.
It was a very hang in there speech. It was a very like, we are going to we are going to answer this. This will not go unanswered. And we are going to escalate. And then there's the October 7th stuff, right? So he directly said, that October 7th and Hamas has been subject to the most vicious campaign of lies, uh, claiming that they raped, claiming that they murdered children, and many believed it. Even friends of Hamas believed it, and there's no evidence, and they did it. All the enemy's claims were refuted, all their lies exposed to the world.
Yeah, just a
And they don't
historical
even want, yeah,
scandal of media, just historic proportions, the lies of October 7th. And he just sort of took that on and said it as what it actually was, right? Like the justification for the genocide was
mm-hmm,
to create this crime that was so unimaginable that you dehumanize the people who carried it out so that you can, you know, kill 30,000 plus people. Um, it, uh, yeah, I mean, it sort of feels like he's been talking about our life for the last 5 months, right? Because
yeah.
it feels like the way that we've watched these stories, like covering it hour by hour, minute by minute, just to watch the stories like be
and
created out of nothing was just,
and knowing, like our lives too, like knowing that they were lies from the beginning, and not being able to say it until the Israelis themselves admitted it, you know? And it's like, there's a lot of these things where we also know we're not allowed to tell the truth about something. Like we're not in a position to be able to say it until we can quote an Israeli who was there, or an Israeli who's put together the
yeah. I mean, we watched
Ronan
I just
Bregman.
hours and hours of footage in those
Yeah,
first weeks, just saying like none of none of these videos match what they're saying
yeah,
happened here. And the thing is that there's a whole October 7th day. I mean, there's many days because it took them 3 or 4 days to take control um, of the territory back. Um, but the October 7th raid by Qassam, the morning raid, was a historic raid that and Nasrallah acknowledged that there's no precedent for in the history of the regional conflict. And that Israel just immediately set about changing the narrative from that.
yeah.
in a way that we've talked about lots, but in a way that seems very hard for Israel as a state to come back from, because in the end, the stories that they're telling are all a story. The lies all are all built on the failure of their military, the failure of their state institutions, the failure of their national project, essentially, right? And so, in order to try to, um, burnish their image or whatever, they ended up kind of dismantling it even more. That
Mhm.
now it's just a pack of lies, and the only people that support them are the fanatics that were always supporting them anyway. They definitely in that period of time were able to kind of demobilize people for a few weeks, maybe.
Those
But in the long
fanatics
run,
sadly include every Western politician from all political parties of the US, Canada, Germany. But let's keep going
yeah,
because uh, the October 7th, he talks about the goal that Israel has of expelling the 1948 Palestinians to Lebanon, the Palestinians, the West Bank to Jordan, the Palestinians of Gaza to Egypt. Um, and he said, again, like the cost of resistance theme. He said, before October 7th, the goal was to do this. This was always the goal. They were doing this quite, with nobody fighting back. And the goal was to do this slowly at the pace that it could be done. And Alexa flood interrupted all that. So he's again, it's kind of answering that what the cost too high, right? Like, did is this genocide kind of like the resistance's fault because they provoked Israel into doing this genocide? And he's saying no, because Israel's plan has always been to do genocide, and they, fast or slow, this was always their plan.
yeah. And if the Palestinians had surrendered in 1948 or surrendered in, all of these examples throughout history where Palestinians have refused
Mm-hmm.
to surrender, is the reason why the Palestinians exist today, and the
Yeah.
reason why that the Israeli state doesn't stretch from Syria to, you know,
Yeah.
so those I thought those were very telling, and the way that he linked that, I just thought that was very telling. And he didn't he's that Israel said, oh, no investigations until after the war, we have to prosecute
Mm-hmm.
the war first, um, because the goal of the lies was to justify the genocide. I mean, I did an interview with Tanya Reinhardt, rest in
Mm-hmm.
peace, in 2003, and she was talking about a slow and steady genocide
You know
in
what I love about Tanya
2003.
Reinhardt? Tanya Reinhardt was this, for people who don't know, Tanya Reinhardt was this Israeli linguist. I think she was like a grad student of Chomsky's. She, I think she lived in Israel, but I think she eventually left Israel. I don't think the last years of her life, she was able to stay in Israel, like Ilan Pape and quite a few others. She wasn't able to kind of live
Yeah,
there.
they run them out of town.
Yeah, she was ran out of town. But she wrote a book called Roadmap to Nowhere. She wrote a book called How to End the War of 1948. But like, there were these years when she would write for the Israeli newspapers, and there would be like some new progressive Israeli politician, and she would just write. There was always like, whenever you would hear of a new progressive Israeli politician, she would write a column being like, nothing will come of this Israeli politician. This guy is equals Sharon, and then she would like explain how nothing, he's not going to do anything different. And so she was very helpful for understanding some certain simple realities about Israeli politics.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't that How to End the War of 1948? I mean, she's like she just gets right to the heart of that, right?
Yeah,
What we've been talking about. This is Israel's plan, and if you don't
exactly.
resist,
So then a couple of notes. There's some information that he gives where he talks about how there's coordination. Bukhaiti talked about this too. Al Mayadeen asked him, "Is there coordination between the resistance axis?" And Bukhaiti said, "Of course, there's coordination between the resistance. Of course, there is." He said, "We're in contact all the time, but everybody does what they can. Everybody has a different role, and everybody has different abilities." And Nasrallah said something similar. He said, "This is we're not we support them. They can make the deal. Like they're the ones negotiating, whatever the negotiations are, whatever the talks are, like we trust them." It was kind of like he was basically saying we trust them, to the Palestinian resistance, to negotiate. But he also said our goal is for Hamas to emerge victorious. So that was what he said on the first speech that he made, and he said that again today. So like the first speech he made, he said two things. He said Hamas must emerge victorious, and we want a ceasefire. Today he didn't even say he wanted a ceasefire. He just said Hamas must emerge victorious.
Yeah, I mean, it's Biden today saying that he wants a ceasefire, which is
But but when these people say they want a ceasefire, they're saying they want Hamas to surrender, right? Like they're not saying they want Israel to stop.
I mean, I think it's the closest thing that we've heard to that
What
to wanting.
exactly did Biden say?
He said that he wants that we need to have at
Pause.
least a temporary ceasefire. He was basically saying,
Weird.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Nasrallah talked about that too, just like these words are just so ridiculous when every day this air bridge,
Yeah.
landing weapons every single day.
Yeah.
The Congress or whatever the other day asking for $17 billion to bail out Israel. Um, yeah, what did Biden say last week? That it was a little over the top was the Israeli outcome. The Israeli attack was a little over the top, as if there was some kind of number that it was slightly less than 30,000. It's just they're just such ghouls. It's
Yeah, there's the
just
depth
watching
of
this
the
every
evil,
day.
the depth of their lies, and how easily they lie, how casually they lie.
And just this fake art like discussion that the media does, like, is there a split between Netanyahu
Ugh,
and Biden? And they just repeat the story over and over.
yeah,
A few media commentators have collected the list of like the number of times that they have just regurgitate that exact same story like every
right.
4 days, that there's a split between Netanyahu and Biden, yeah, as if the Americans have any. Yeah. Even just claiming the successes that they're saying that that there wouldn't be any aid at all getting into Gaza if it weren't for Biden.
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah, well, he did go to he interceded with the Mexican president himself. He was the one who convinced the Mexican president to do that. So the I thought, well, like what can we say, like overall? We can also take the two speeches together, because he gave two speeches in within a couple of days, and I felt like it was very Abu Obeida too. It was very like we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we're gonna fight till the end. And
yeah, which I think they had the same feeling. It did seem like we were moving towards a ceasefire, and now there does look to be like an interim period that is coming here that looks like, um, yeah,
slower.
he's trying to keep people on track
Yeah.
during this interim period where, it's not clear. I mean, he gave two speeches in one week, in part because Nasrallah gives annual
Hmm.
addresses, right? So
Hmm.
sometimes these annual addresses fall at the same time as, these world events. Um, but yeah, I mean, he was funny today because he said, I won't, at the end of his speech, he said, "This is my second to last point." He said, "I won't say it's number seven because you'll think I've been going on too long." But just, the way he just puts it on the table in just such plain language, that,
Yeah.
the resistance is dignity. The resistance is a culture. It's a way of being. It's not something that gets splintered off from the population because of a single event, which is kind of how the Israelis treat these things, as if, one massacre is going to divide the population in such a way that the resistance can't operate. And he just underscored that it's like that this the dignity comes in the resistance, that it's the way of life, um, that it's not something you can look at any given moment and address whether it's a good idea or not. It's
Yeah.
clear that the trajectory of the resistance, when you look at a group like Hezbollah that didn't exist in the 1980s and is now what it is, like dictating in some ways the terms to Israel about how the war is going to go, is just such an enormous difference from what it used to be. And I think that's the same for the Palestinians as well. And he pointed that out, that the resistance operations, Abu Baida said it too, that unprecedented losses to the Israelis, right? Like double the
Mm.
numbers of the intifadas. Um, Everything that we're witnessing right now is just so
Uh,
much be unprecedented in the
yeah.
history of their struggle.
It's more than 1973. I was reading a lot about, I did an episode on it, like a sit rep on it, but I was reading a lot about the 1973 war with Egypt, and it was in the, I think Israeli losses were in the hundreds, like 800 or something. That was like less than October 7th, and and definitely less than the past 4.5 months. And
Yeah,
so,
there's going to be Israeli commissions that unpack all of this for years to come, that are going to make these lies. Uh, yeah,
I mean, yeah, every single thing that we've been saying, that we've been quoting, that shows all of the lies of October 7th and since, they're all going to be common knowledge in, a decade. And the people that are saying them now are going to be like outcasts,
yeah,
like us. um uh there was John, we should go live, like what some of these, we should try going live, because there was a comment that really, that really moved me, because I promised listeners that I wouldn't make fun of us. I wouldn't say them, like the fact that our audience is like mostly over 35. But someone said, there was a commenter that said, I'm 24, and I really like the fact that you guys are older and you have a different view than my parents, because it's like, I guess if you have like boomer parents, or whatever, Gen X parents that have like awful, horrible pro-genocidal views, like there's some relief if you find people on the internet that don't have that. So
yeah.
um
I don't know that thread. What your audience has been saying, that they're all old.
no, it's not that, it's the YouTube, it's, yes, and people do,
Oh,
and
the YouTube stats.
the YouTube demographics, but whatever, like we'll go on Instagram too, and we'll catch the 30 somethings there.
Yeah, I mean Bukhari, the Ansar Allah spokes, he's the same age as us, and he talks about his political experience
Hmm.
being like coming of age in the Iraq War,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
being in Europe when all these massive demonstrations were happening against the war in Iraq, and it seemed like the whole world was united, and then all of a sudden the war in Iraq, it didn't matter about these demonstrations, and then all of a sudden, the sort of Al Qaeda
Hmm.
strain in Iraq made the resistance, um, it made it difficult to support for people, and it was
Yeah.
very confusing, like, what's the word, like disconcerting moment for a political time. And I think like that's our generation, right? Like we started with the
Yeah.
9/11
Yeah.
world, with the us or them, you know, uh, yeah,
Bukaiti talked about Iraq today too. He talked about ISIS, and he said this is another thing. It's like Syria has to worry about ISIS. Like they can't escalate with Israel the way they would otherwise, because they're dealing with all these American proxies, um, and
Yeah.
Turkey too. So there, it was interesting because he's trying to address like the disunity, and um, it does feel now like there's this kind of really slow attrition. I mean, I had this unbelievable anxiety about the imminent attack on Rafah, which still could happen. Like, I think it's still very likely to happen. But then the past few days, it's been this like lull, and it's a very strange feeling because
I just think that we're just so viscerally aware of the suffering that's happening every
yeah,
day. It doesn't feel like you can be a political analyst and sort of take a
yeah,
step back and say, oh, and this is, this is a natural 2 or 3 week,
yeah,
what's the internecine period.
interregnum, yeah.
Because we're so aware of the suffering and almost the impossibility that this can just continue indefinitely.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and this is another very Israel strategy, right? It's like they imposed the siege in 2005, and now the siege is just like a natural fact, like a mountain range or a ocean current. Like it's just part of life. There's never this policy that was instituted a couple of decades ago is like supposed to be accepted as a natural phenomenon. And now it's like there's this genocide, and it's been going on for 4.5 months. And it's like we're just supposed to like the demand to stop the genocide is now delusional. It's now over the top. The demand to, know the facts of October 7th is enough to make you a pariah.
yeah, and everything just is so out of place. Like the saying, like the word that they attached to October 7th, like the
Mm.
heinous attack or
Do you
the
condemn the attack?
massacre attack, whatever it is, it's just dwarfed by what Israel's doing.
Yeah,
It's almost like
yeah,
the hypocrisy, which I think Nasrallah also
yeah. He said
addressed.
there's never been a greater. Yeah, that's right. There's no greater hypocrisy than the Western leaders. All right. Anything else?
No, I think we sit repped that pretty good.
We sit wrapped it. Okay, guys. Like and subscribe and stuff. We'll be back with more breakdowns this week. Have a good night.
See you, Justin.